Let's play a game, kids. Now, what race is this man, Keanu Reeves? If you said white, you'd be half right. He's actually mixed race, being of European as well as of Asian and Pacific Islander descent. Now, what race is this woman, Jessica Alba? Again, if you said white, you'd be half right. She's actually, again, mixed, being of both European and Mexican-American descent. What race is this man, Slash? Again, if you said white, half right. His mother was African-American, and his father was English, so there you go. Finally, what race is Halle Berry? Now I think you can guess what I'm getting at with this game. She's African-American and English. But what do they all have in common aside from being of mixed descent? Well, ideally, if the alt-right and was Kang's people are to be believed, none of them would be considered pure enough to enter into a racial ethno-state, on the simple grounds that they're mixed race, despite the pigmentation of their skin color giving off an otherwise appearance. No. You have been warned. Let the demonetization process begin! Now, this video isn't just directed at the alt-right, it's also directed at the, was Kang's people, Black Israelites, really any racial demographic or person, specifically I should say, who's guilty of giving out racial purity tests and determining a person's racial validity based on those metrics, I guess you could say. So, where does this video come from? Well, while I was working on last week's video about the original Aboriginals and Black people, I made a point of pointing out a rather peculiar point of contention I had with their whole point of separation between two seemingly distinctive points on the racial spectrum, that being white and black, to point out the obvious. Roll clip. And how black were these First Nations people? Were they dark chocolate, milk chocolate, baking chocolate, Swiss chocolate, extra dark? I don't know. Show me on this chocolate graph how dark all of the First Nations people were. Which color chocolate? And follow-up question, does your legitimacy and virtue as a human, or as a First Nations people, increase the darker the chocolate you go? Yes, the chocolate graph is coming back in this video, kids. Hold on to your fedoras and shoe buckles. You're in for the ride of your life. Probably not, but we'll see. Now I'm going to capitalize on this blurred line of distinction by exploiting how completely arbitrary it is. Now, to determine who belongs to what group based on differences derived from what are essentially personally standardized qualifications is obviously silly. There is no standard that I'm aware of, unless there is, that, would ideally be used to separate the groups of people. We get close, but there's dissent from both sides. There are people in between, in the gray area, that neither ethnocentric demographic really wants for some reason, and that's sad. But, oh well, what can you do? Now, Sargon, in his debate with Richard Spencer on the Worski livestream many months ago, before Worski had his mental breakdown. Poor Worski. He attempted to commentate on this glaringly obvious issue with pertinence to the potential development of the ethno-state. Because you see, as I demonstrated in the beginning of this video, it's not so easy to tell who's white and who's not by simple appearances alone, especially if you're that much of a purity monger. The simple fact of the matter is that I have questions, people, relevant ones, that need to be addressed and systemized by your designated arbiters, if I am to even begin to consider, racial identity politics to be of any merit to me. Sorry, but if you want to convince me of anything, we have to have this discussion. First off the bat is the obvious question, what metric are we using to determine who's white and who's black, etc., etc.? Now, I'm reminded of this one graphic from Family Guy, I think you know the one of Peter Griffin being pulled over by the cops and essentially being compared to a skin tone card to see if he's okay or not okay. I wouldn't say that that's nearly a broad enough metric to use, and I would even go as far as to say that my handy-dandy little chocolate graph from last week's video still doesn't come close to even being comprehensive enough for you people. There are about 22 or 23 colors on this graph that a lot of white identitarians would consider too dark to be white, and that's without even considering that people have the ability to tan in the summer. And then, on the other side of this, there's about 13 to 16 chocolates on this graph that Black identitarians would consider to be too light to be black. I might be being too generous, and I might not be being strict enough with that number. It really comes down to the individual's personal metric, like I said. So what to do with all of the people in the middle of all that? The chocolate graph is out then, since we can't use it. What then? What metric can be used? I brought up one metric that could be used in an earlier video, and it's got a bit more scientific basis than the chocolate graph does, or the Peter Griffin one. Obviously. Now, it is called the Fitzpatrick scale, and it's a numerical classification scheme for human skin color. It was developed by Thomas Fitzpatrick in 1975 to, quote, estimate the responses of different types of skin to ultraviolet light. It was initially developed on the basis of skin and eye color, but when that proved misleading, it was altered to be based on the patient's reports of how their skin responds to the sun. It was also extended to a wider range of skin types. Oh, will you look at that? The Fitzpatrick scale remains a recognized tool for dermatological research into human skin pigmentation. Interesting. Unfortunately for my autistic ass, and I bet other spurgs out there online, this metric only has about 6 classifications for skin pigmentation, ranging from pale with freckles to deeply pigmented. So I guess we can't accept dermatological standards. They don't provide a definitive line for what is white and what is not white. Woe is me. And you. I truly thought we had successfully found a metric that would be acceptable for all of humankind. I know, I am deeply saddened as well by this. Hold up! I know what will cheer everyone up. This wouldn't be an entertaining Weebo video without some sort of reactionary nonsensical spurgatory over social media. Now would it? So I've been saving something for you guys for quite a while that demonstrates just exactly how ridiculous and arbitrary and gun-jumpy this whole concept of racial identitarianism is. Been sitting on it since early June when I went on my trip to Greece, and this seems like the best time to utilize it as a good example of, the fickleness of identity politics. Big shout out to Andre M for this interaction on Twitter. You da bomb diggity, my friend. For context, this entire interaction stems from one of Ranting Monkey's failed attempts to tease me over Twitter. The boyfriend is Greek. Greeks are white. Thank you for your input. Having Greek ancestry, Greeks are not white. They are olive-skinned. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm in Greece right now, man, and let me tell you, it's pretty olivey here. That is because of the sun. For fuck's sakes, I've seen Greeks who have lived near the Arctic Circle for 20 years, and they still olive. Boyfriend's dad is like fresh off the boat Greek living in the Midwest, and he looks like a cup of coffee with a teaspoon of cream. Does he look Mexican? Darker. People like you should not have the right to benefit from a white society. It's people like you who will grow old and bitter, obsessing on that notion alone. People like you are just good at destroying neighborhoods and even countries. Imagine that, lil old 5'2" me capable of all that. I said people like you, not you alone, for fuck's sakes. People like me. What does that mean exactly? Race mixers. I'm a race mixer now. How? Look at that, kids. I went from a good little Slavic white people breeder to a filthy mud shark in the span of less than a day with this guy. From trad thought to the destroyer of Western civilization, all in the time it takes for the Earth to spin on its axis. Here's the kicker, though. My boyfriend's dad might be dark as heck, but my boyfriend is as pale as a fucking ghost. Paler than I, even. I don't know what to tell you guys. Back to our regularly scheduled content now, kids. Hope you had fun. So, we've established, hopefully, that there is no clearly defined benchmark for white versus black when it comes to pigmentation alone. And we must ask ourselves, is racial identitarianism relegated to purely skin tone? Probably not. We'll explore this. Entertain the notion that racial identitarianism has some validity. There are several stereotype traits that people use to identify, say, blacks, whites, Asians, Jews, etc., etc. Not all of them completely 100% accurate, of course not. But that's my point. So, for instance, red hair and freckles are typically assigned to white people. Extremely curly hair to black people. Slanted eyes to Asians, and Jews have big noses, I guess. These are just racial stereotypes associated with these races. However, people, if you're going to use that as your metric, you got another thing coming to you. Did you know that black people can have naturally red hair? On top of that, did you know that the Jews were actually persecuted in Europe pre-20th century and identified by their red hair. Did you know that white people can in fact have curly hair people? Not to even mention the fact that there are such a thing as Jufros. As for those with slanted eyes, or what is typically referred to in the scientific community as epicanthic folds, did you know that it is not relegated to solely Asians? Quote, it's also been seen in some Native American peoples and occasionally in Europeans. Example, Scandinavians and the Poles. Hey, that's me! Although I don't think I have slanted eyes. No. As for the big noses portion of this, if you ask any black ideologue, they will direct you to the noseless Egyptian statues that exist as proof of some historical revisionist white conspiracy. I have plenty of examples if you'd like to peruse through them at your leisure. They've inundated my comment sections, and they obviously want someone to see it, so, shout out to those guys. Now, I'm not saying that these qualities aren't more typical to certain demographics. Obviously not. I'm also not saying that these outliers with these traits should be excluded from whatever demographic they want to identify with. I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit. Honestly, it's it's such a non-issue for me. The only reason I ever make these videos is just to make fun of it. But the simple fact is that they're not exclusive traits, which makes this all the more difficult when you're trying to divide people based on certain benchmarks that you haven't agreed upon yet. We live in a world where everyone's got an opinion, people. That makes this all the more difficult. I mean, we could search for other metrics that can be used to determine differences in the races. Sure, there's bone density that can be measured. Black people typically have denser bones, but finding that out means having to take a bone density test. But there are certain problems with this. For one, giving everyone a bone density test seems like a rather expensive way to determine who belongs in your ethno-state and who doesn't. And then there's something else to consider, that bone density isn't a stagnant thing, nor is it universal or uniform across the demographics that you're measuring within. All throughout your life, your bones are constantly adjusting. For instance, after menopause, women's bone density tanks. After 30, people's bone density tank. Arthritis, lupus, asthma, all that shit tanks your bone density. Bone density, probably not an ideal metric. Just saying. So what about, say, cultural values? Do I even need to point out the vast array of subcultures that exist within cultures themselves that have their own values? I mean, boomers and millennials from the same demographics alone have vastly different values and ideals from each other, and they're constantly evolving. So, I mean, by all means, you can try to assign people to different in-groups and out-groups based on their values, but good luck. Would you use IQ to determine who's part of your group? Sure, there are trends, but again, nothing is standard, and that's not even getting into the fickle nature of measuring intelligence. But then there's the question of what would you do with the very obviously white people who just have a really low IQ score? Now, the simple fact of the matter is that there is no standard for race, and I'm not just talking about outliers. I'm talking about a spectrum of variance that has been the result of centuries of intellectual interaction amongst the demographics. Improvement, albeit not in uniformity, but certainly in universality. Cultures improving and advancing throughout the ages to get to a more advanced level of thought. I mean, let's be honest. Our ancestors, fucking idiots compared to what we know now. Same thing can probably go for black people, and Native Americans, the whole spectrum of races, guys. The Flynn effect is a thing. So if over time the demographics have been changing and in flux, then standardizing a specific way of determining who belongs into an in-group and out-group would have to constantly be in flux as well. Do you catch my drift? I mean, you can say what you want about globalism and the intermingling of people outside of their respective cultures and ethnic groups or whatever being like, I don't know, the fall of Western civilization and the end of days and times for white people, or, you know, white extinction, or, you know, the uprising of black people. I don't give a fuck. To be quite frank, Pandora's box has been opened. And for quite a while now at this point, so you're a little late to the game. Now, you can absolutely make the argument that I am arguing from a position of individualism, absolutely. But more than that, I'm also pointing out fundamental flaws within a system of thought that necessitates the separation of in-groups and out-groups to achieve its goals. If you're not on the same page, unilaterally, universally, uniformly, then I'm sorry to say this, but you're absolutely never, ever going to be able to achieve what it is that you want in life, and that is an in-group versus an out-group of very strictly regimented people being included in that in-group. Not everyone's going to agree. Like me, I disagree with you, but I'm like way out of left field. But even within your own party and the alt-right and the WasKangs people, you're gonna have disagreements. Within the black, the WasKangs people, we have actual WasKangs people, the people who believe that their ancestors were pharaohs, and then we have people who believe that they were the original black Israelites. And guess what? Ancient pharaohs and Israelites didn't get along. One enslaved the other. So then you have people at odds within your own ethnic groups. And it's all just a big whole jumble of ideological fucketry. So good luck with that ethno-state, kids. Now, if you like what I'm doing on my channel, you like my content, please consider checking out the links in the description to my Amazon wishlist, the Patreon, and the Teespring store. If you like what I'm doing, but maybe not that much, that's totally cool. You can always comment any disputes you have with my positions. I welcome them. Comment, share, subscribe, click that bell so you get the notification, because I know you do want to get that notification, that is. And I'll see you when I see you. Bye, bitches.